Hello, hello, truth seekers all over the world. This is Matthew from Back to the Covenant. I hope you're having an amazing day wherever you're at, whenever you may be watching this in the world. So, haven't done a lot of videos lately, but I feel led to do this one. So, we observed Passover. Let's see, what was it? 5 days ago. And if you haven't observed, if you're watching this in a few days and you haven't observed Passover yet, don't trip out on, oh, Matt's already observed Passover. We haven't done it yet. That's not what this video is about. It's not about, oh, everybody's on a different calendar. We're doing feast days at different times. That's not what this is about. So, what this video is about, answering the question, does Passover prove an evening or morning start to a day? So, just for context, so when I first came into keeping Torah way back in the day, it's been a minute. I'm trying to think. I've been keeping Torah close to 20 years, so learned a lot, been humbled a lot, eyes open to a lot of things during that 20 years journey to the truth. But I came into keeping Torah, so when you're not studied up on topics, you just follow what other people do. So I followed people with different topics and with different topics, different understandings. So I started out as a new Torah believer, doing the evening to evening start to a day. And so I was challenged back, I think it was in 2020, 2021 by some brothers. And I had to go back to the drawing board on quite a few of my foundational beliefs regarding scripture and Torah observance. And one of them was, when does a scriptural day begin? So there are some videos out there that teach that the observance of Passover proves an evening start to a day. This one's going to be different. From Matt's perspective, and I'm going to do my best with this presentation, this video, to show that Passover actually proves a sunrise start to a day. So if you're on the other side of the fence, so to speak, and you believe Passover proves an evening start to a day, just hear me out to the end. Just hear a brother out. Don't answer a matter before you hear it, like Proverbs talks about. So just hear what I got to share, hear what I got to say when it comes to scripture and the historical references I'm going to present in this presentation. So let's get into it. So we're going to look at the question, does Passover prove an evening or morning start to a day? So first thing we have to admit, now this is a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people. And I actually didn't come to this realization, like, I don't know, the last year or two. So I started, like I said earlier, I started doing an evening start to a day when I started keeping Torah. And it wasn't until a couple years ago I did a ton of research and had a lot of conversations with a certain brother. You know who you are. Thank you, sir. I know you're gonna be watching this later. Probably sharing it everywhere. But I was challenged, and then I had to go back to the drawing board, and I came to realization that scriptural day actually starts at sunrise. So hear me out to the end. But we have to admit that an evening start today is Jewish tradition, and I'm going to show that with a book that I have, and let me flash it real quick for anybody that wants a copy. So I'm going to do like 4 different quotes from the book, The Jewish Festivals: A Guide to Their History and Observance, by Chaim Schwartz. If you want to go grab a copy and fact check me, which is totally cool, because I'm about the truth over here. I'm about being righteous over being right. Now, sadly, there's a lot of people that are on the other side of that scenario or whatever, but I want to be righteous for the Father. And I'll even put myself out there and do unpopular teachings, because there's not a lot of people out there doing sunrise to sunrise teachings on when a day starts. There's some, but majority are teaching an evening start to a day. So here's the first quote from this book, and this is from page 13. At the beginning of the Common Era, so we're not talking about 2020, we're talking about a few hundred years ago, the Jew carried thought of the Sabbath in his mind during the entire week. Food delicacies acquired on the other 6 days were put aside for the Sabbath. Thursday was the market day on which Jews of the farms and villages of Palestine brought their produce to town, and merchants displayed and sold their wares. But the climax of the preparations for the sacred day of rest came on Friday. So let's go to the next quote, and it's on the exact same page, page 13. This one is very telling. You should definitely pay attention to this one. In order to assure against profanation, so they didn't want to profane the Sabbath. Profanation of the Sabbath, the Jews added the late Friday afternoon hours to the Sabbath. Now, are we talking about a man-made tradition here? Or are we talking about scripture? It said the Jews added the late Friday afternoon hours to the Sabbath. So here we go. Here we have the Jews a few hundred years ago adding their own traditions and adding more time to the Sabbath so they can run around and buy the stuff they need on preparation day. Let's keep rocking. So 2 pages later in the same book, darkness came toward the close of the meal, when a blast was blown on the trumpet as a signal that the Sabbath was over. So here we have evidence that it's Jewish tradition for an evening start to a day. Because it says darkness came toward the close of the meal, and at the end, the Sabbath was over. So here we've checked the box that an evening start to a day from this historical reference from this book was Jewish tradition. So again, we have to admit that an evening start to a day is Jewish tradition. There's no getting around that. Not to say that everything that the Jews do is wrong, but if their tradition nullifies the commands of Elohim, that's where it's important to not follow what they do. Because the Jews don't have everything wrong, just like Christians don't, just like other flavors, so to speak. Not everybody has some truth, but people have things wrong too. And this is clear error in Jewish history. So let's keep going. Same page, just different paragraph. Later, it became customary, here we go, we're talking about customs, to hold communal services in a synagogue on Friday night and to recite Kiddush in the synagogue then. We know that this was the custom in where? Babylonia, in the time of Amoram. I did a quick search on Amoram yesterday. It's just some of the Jewish leaders back in the day in Babylonia. So here we go. We have a direct reference to Babylon. Babylon. Hopefully the hair on the back of your neck is standing up at this point. If it's not, oh boy. Let me read that one more time. We know that this was the custom in Babylonia. So they're talking about customs they picked up from Babylon. So let's dive a little deeper, and we're going to look at some information about the Babylonian calendar, how they understood time. And so this reference is from website www.caeno.org, and you can take a screenshot if you like. So it's under the section number 15, the day begins, and that's all under number 3, basics of Babylonian astronomy. So here's a quote. The Babylonian day begins and ends at sunset. Observations follow a tripartite, that's a fun word, division of the night. So I guess they divided the night up by 3 sections. Either they take place during the first part of the night, beginning at sunset, later in the middle of the night, or before sunrise during the last part of the night. So let me read this first sentence again. The Babylonian day begins and ends at sunset. Brothers and sisters, time and time again in Scripture, we're called to come out of Babylon, not to stay in her practices. So let's review really quick. So up to this point, we see Jewish and Babylonian traditions tied to an evening start to a day. So it's not good. And we haven't even got to the Passover yet. So again, we're called to come out of Babylon. So let's look at the Sefer version of Jubilees 49:1. So this is a popular verse when the topic of Passover comes up and whether it proves a sunrise or evening start to a day. So this is from the Sefer version particularly. So this is Jubilees 49:1. Remember the commandment which Yahuwah commanded you concerning the Pesach, that you should celebrate it in its season on the 14th of the first month, that you should kill it before it is evening, that they should eat it by night on the evening of the 15th from the time of the setting of the sun. So there's other ministries and believers out there that will quote this verse and say, see, evening start today. It's saying the 15th. So let's keep rocking and let's read verse 10 in the same chapter of the Sefer, Jubilees 49, verse 10. Let the children of Israel come and observe the feast of Pesach on the day of its appointed time, on the 14th day of the first month, between the evenings from the third part of the day to the third part of the night, for 2 portions of the day are given to the light, and a third part to the evening. So in the reference to Passover in this verse, is it consistent to verse 1 in this translation? Because here in verse 10 it says, let the children of Israel come and observe the feast of Pesach on the day of its fixed time, on the 14th day of the first month. But in verse 1 it says, they shall celebrate in its season on the 14th day of the first month. But if you go down just a little bit, it says, eat it by night on the evening of the 15th. So to me, that's not consistent. There's an issue here. And just for context, I actually, when I was doing like heavy research years ago on this topic of when a day starts and Passover and so on and so forth, I reached out to Dr. Pigeon, who's the gentleman that heads up the team, so to speak, for the Sefer translation. And I asked him, I was like, what's up with this translation? Why does it have 15th here? Because we'll see in a minute, I'll read the Hallelujah Scriptures version of Jubilees. It doesn't have the 15th right here. It's I think a much better translation. And I asked him, I was like, why did you choose to translate it that way? And he pretty much, from his perspective, he said, I'm doing the best I can with what scrolls I have access to. And so there's people that have different opinions on the Sefer and whatnot. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to do a ad hominem or character assassination of Dr. Pigeon. I think he's a servant of the Most High. He's doing the best he can. But I think he kind of goofed up on this translation for this Jubilees 49:1 right here. So let's check out the Hallelujah Scriptures version, same verse. Remember the commandment which Yahweh commanded you concerning the Pesach, that you should celebrate it in its season on the 14th of the first month, that you should kill it before it is evening, and that they should eat it by the night in the evening, from the time of the setting of the sun. Now here is from my perspective, and there's a lot of other people that will agree, a much better translation. And it's actually not confusing, because if we go back to the Sefer version, let's just put our thinking cap on for a minute. Let's put our shoes in a new believer. So let's just position ourselves as a new believer. We've just been keeping Torah for like a month. We're studying a lot of stuff. We're watching videos, and we're just getting a lot of information from a lot of different places. And then we stumble upon the Sefer translation, and we start studying Passover a little bit. And we read this version, and it will most likely cause confusion, because all through the scriptures, and we'll see this later, where all through the scriptures you see Passover is observed on the 14th. Passover is observed on the 14th. All the times, there's nowhere in the canon, at least of the 66, where it says to observe the Passover on the 15th day. It's always the 14th. And then you come to this verse or version of the Jubilees 49:1, you're like, what is, I don't understand that. It's just saying to observe it on the 14th, the 15th, which one is it? So I'd recommend getting a copy of the Holy Scriptures version of Jubilees personally because I love it and it's a good translation. No translation is perfect. Always got to say that, but if we compare these two that we just looked at, this is a much better translation of Jubilees 49:1. So let's examine the question, where in Scripture are we commanded to observe Passover on the 15th? Since there's a lot of people that will pull Jubilees 49:1 in the Sefer version, which has the 15th. Let's see where we can see that in Scripture, if it's anywhere. So here is a couple verses. I'll blast through them real quick. Leviticus 23:5. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, between the evenings, is the Passover to Yahweh. Numbers 9:3. On the 14th day of this month, between the evenings, perform it at its appointed time, according to all its laws and right rulings you perform. The appointed time for Passover is the 14th day, not the 15th. Because the 15th is the first day of unleavened bread. And Exodus 12, verse 6, the original Passover story. You shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then all the assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it between the evenings. So nowhere in Scripture are we commanded to observe the Passover on the 15th. It's just not there. And if you found it somewhere, anywhere in Scripture, leave it in the comments. I would love to see it because I haven't found it yet in my years of study. All right, so let's paint the Passover picture, shall we? So we've already seen quite a few verses where it's observed on the 14th day of the first month. And there's also the important detail of killing the Passover lamb or goat between the evenings. So let's look at how long this takes. But before I jump into that real quick, I just want to challenge any believers that might be watching this or listening to it, and you don't do this detail, I'd highly recommend you to reevaluate that viewpoint because it's an important part of the detail of Passover observance. And we saw our beloved Messiah did just that. He had his disciples handle the business, but the Last Supper was a Passover meal. So let's think about just how long it takes. So I've been part of serving scriptural Passovers for a long time, over 15 years. So I've seen it, been a part of it a lot of times. It takes time. So you jab, not trying to be graphic or anything, just talking about the process. You jab it in the throat, it bleeds out. You already have a hole that's dug. You let it bleed out, and you hold it. So the group I'm a part of, we try to be compassionate when we're doing this process, especially since it's for the Most High, so we want to be pleasing to Him. And then you dress it or undress it. Silly term, it's kind of backwards. and then you get all the innards out, and then you have a fire pit or however you cook it set up, and then you cook it, and all this takes hours and hours. I remember multiple Passover celebrations I was a part of. I mean, we didn't leave the building until like 2 a.m. because it took forever for that joker to cook. And so if a day really does start at evening, and that's the transitionary time from one day to another, then that means if you're doing Passover properly, you're killing it, you're doing all this stuff, cooking it, you're observing Passover on the 15th day. You're not doing it on the 14th. So you might need to go back and watch this section of the video 4 or 5 times for let it click, because when I was doing the research on this topic, there's a gentleman that was studying this topic out, and we were talking a lot, going back and forth. He had to put some visuals on whiteboards for me like 4 or 5 times before it clicked. So you might need to come back and watch this section like 4 or 5 times for it to register. But to me, this is solid evidence that a day does not start at evening, but in the morning at sunrise, because of the way the Passover is set up. So here I have another visual to maybe drive it home even deeper. So in Jubilees 49:10, it says, and let them eat it at the time of the evening until the third part of the night. So on the top in the middle, I have 3 parts of the night. And on the end, it has done eating the Passover, the third part of the night, because you are supposed to have it burnt up completely by morning. And then on the bottom under it is 3 parts of the day, and the Passover is supposed to be burned up before morning. And then on the top left, it says Passover occurs on the 14th day of the first month. We obviously drilled that home pretty heavy. So on the bottom right, the $1,000,000 question: how does evening fit into this context? To me, it does not. And to drive it home even deeper, here's a question to ponder on. How can we observe Passover on the 14th day from the third part of the day to the third part of the night if a day begins at sundown? Again, you might need to go back and watch this section again and really ponder on this question. Let me read it to you one more time. How can we observe Passover on the 14th day from the third part of the day to the third part of the night if a day begins at sundown? And so that's all I got for you. So if you agree or disagree, I would love to hear from you in the comments. If you still do an evening start today and you have some solid evidence, I would love to hear from you in the comments. And so if this video was intriguing to you and you want to do some further research, I actually wrote a book about when the scriptural day begins a few years ago. And so if you want to check that out and dive deeper into this very important topic, because it affects a lot of Torah observance. Because if you don't know when a day starts, you're going to have trouble observing the feast correctly, Sabbath correctly, and a lot of things. So that link for that is in the description. And if you haven't already subscribed, please do, and then hit that like button. And thank you for watching, and you have an amazing rest of your day or evening, depending on where you're at in the world. Shalom.